Hello and welcome to the new playthrough for Stalingrad 42, Southern Russia, June to December 1942. GMT game designed by Mark Simonich. It's part of the, I suppose what I should call the apostrophe 4X series by Mark Simonich. And there's me making a game series sound like an Australian beer. But anyway, so this has just been released, well, a few months back, and I had a look at it, and as I'd done Holland 44, which is part of the same series, if you look at previous playthroughs, I thought it'd be good to get this on the table and get this videoed up as well, so that you'd get some contrast for the two systems. The situations are quite different, the scales are quite different, so it'd be an interesting analysis between the two. So it's been a little while since I did a video, apologies for that. Christmas in the way. I was also actually busy being a pantomime dame and also injuring my leg, so there's been a little bit of stuff going on here, so that the videos have taken a back seat. Hope you enjoyed the new bumper for the video. Thought we'd get a little bit clever on the graphics and try and get things a bit more formal. But anyway, that is that, and yeah, on with Stalingrad 42. So as normal with these things, I do an intro video, just going through the major parts of the game, counters, map, sequence of play, odds and sods, and an idea of the rhythm of play. There's a lot I went through in Holland 44, and I'd probably say about almost 70% of it is relevant here. So I mean, have a look at that as well, that intro as well. It'll give you a good grounding. So I'm probably going to be even briefer than I was there, and just go through, as I say, the main components, and get you some idea before we actually go into the playthrough itself. One thing I'd like to say straight up is that excuse me, that the Stalingrad 42 is of course a game about Stalingrad, and being the contrary guy I am, I'm going to be doing a scenario which is the Caucasus campaign, in which Stalingrad isn't even on the map. So make what you will of that, and yeah, I think this scenario, the Caucasus campaign, well, it fits very, very nicely for the playthrough. It's a campaign. It's reasonably short. There's, I think, 17 turns to it. Fairly low counter density, so it doesn't get too overwhelming, and it also has a couple of theatres and directions it goes, and also the Russian side is pretty much on the defensive for the whole game, so playing solo, it probably lends itself a bit better. I mean, the main part of Stalingrad 42, of course, the Germans are pushing forward for a lot of the game, but then of course there is the counter attack around Stalingrad. So I thought this fitted better, but yes, unfortunately, if you wanted to see Stalingrad in 1942, it's just going to be off the map, and yeah, we're down in the Caucasus region. So yeah, so let's have a look at a few things about this game, give you some idea. So I think we'll look at the maps first up. Right, so this is one of the Caucasus maps. There's actually two kind of half maps that go end to end to build this campaign. Just using it to run through the terrain here. We have our wonderful kind of magnolia, beige, off-white, clear hexes. You'll find that the symbols are very similar to the Holland 44 and sort of conform very much, but they do have different treatment in this game. So the clear, as usual, usual one movement point for anybody to move on, and yeah, there's no particular effects on combat, and the tank shifts in this game, because the combat is done, it's a 1 to 6 table, done on odds, but there are column shifts. There's no modifiers to the dice, it's just shifts left or right on the combat tables, and one of those is of course a tank shift, and that of course is possible in clear terrain. We have two types of road here. We have primary and secondary road. So primary, the dark colour, secondary, the lighter colour, thinner here. So pretty much treat really the same. There's not really a lot of difference between them. It's just during rain and mud turns, the secondary roads become clear instead of roads. Effectively, you increase the mech movement. Roads are 1 movement point for leg, half a movement point for mechanized units, and of course goes up to 1 with the secondary in rain and mud turns. And roads are very important on supply as well. We'll go through that separately. We do have railroads here. We have two kinds, and they're both railroads. There is this clear, just the hashed line here, the standard sort of railroad symbol. We have green coloured ones as well, and those are the railway lines that the Germans can convert to their own gauge and run supply through and train units through, whereas the others you don't convert. That's effectively the difference between the two. So beyond that, we have towns and landmarks, which are the dots here. You've got a yellow dot here is the town, landmark is the white dot. No particular help on anything. It does help on the determined defence table. It's not clear. It's an other terrain. That's basically what they do. They don't do anything else for you. And then we get off the clear terrain into some difficult stuff. We have, of course, the marsh. Now, marsh is defender doubled, 2 movement points for non-mech, 4 movement points for mech, and no tank shifts, of course. Defender doubled when attacking into, when being attacked, when it's in the marsh, but also when you're attacking out of as well. So the defender will be doubled against you. So really need to try and clear out of there. Although having had a quick run through on this, it's difficult to avoid on this sort of western part of the board. You will have to deal with the marsh in some places. So that's the marsh. There is what's known as a seasonal marsh. I'm not going to bother showing the symbol. There's a little bit over on the east, but effectively that becomes marsh at some points in the game. However, it's in areas which are effectively irrelevant to the game, so I'm not going to bother looking at that particularly. Beyond that, we have rough, woods, and wooded rough. So the rough is this dark brown, well, light brown, I suppose. The woods are just the wood symbol, and the wooded rough is the darker woods with the light brown underneath it here. So the big thing about rough is it's more movement for mech, but you can still get the tank shift. When you have woods, you get it's +1 movement for mech, but you don't get the tank shift, and of course wooded rough gets the same as woods itself. However, rough and not woods gets a column shift on the combat results table in defence. So wooded rough does, and rough does, but woods on their own don't. So there's a subtle difference there. Tank's not as good in woods, but defenders better in rough, and wooded rough gives you the best of both worlds, if you like. Going on beyond that, we of course have mountain here. Now mountain, 2 movement points for non-mech. As you can see, it's 1 movement point for practically anything on the board here for standard leg units, non-mech units. Mountain is 2, 4 for mech units, and no tank shift possible, of course. Infantry type units are doubled in defence. Interesting enough, though, Axis mountain units, the Romanians and the Germans, they are actually doubled attack strength, which is interesting as well. There's some restrictions on advance after combat as well. Finally, you have these white hexes, which are Alpine. Now, so mountain units can go in, and it's +1 movement point, and the mech can't go in, of course, at all. Only mountain units can actually attack across or into those hexes, and they don't get a double attack strength. So yeah, very restrictive on the Alpine side. And finally, we're on to on hexes terrain types. We have the minor city and major city. So towns and landmarks don't really count for much. Minor city and major cities. A minor city is, for example, here, Kropotkin. Oh, I've got a little bit of a shadow there. So this guy here. So it's the sort of speckled city look, but with a clear terrain around it. That's the minor city. Major city, we've got here Krasnodar. So same, but we have a filled-in grey on the hex side. So both doubled on strength, double strength defending for infantry units. 1 movement point to go through, no tank shifts, and it's a city column, a special city column on the determined defence table. So there's really not that much difference between the two, major and minor city. That's it. So yeah. Finally, we've got rivers. So if you saw my Holland 44 stuff, the rivers were a big thing there. We had a lot of bridges and things like that. Because of the scale of this game, we're looking at pretty much division level scale here, as opposed to what was pretty much battalion level in Holland 44. As the scale's moved up, actually having individual bridges is kind of pointless, really. So particularly on minor rivers, which were a hell of a bugbear in Holland 44, these are not much of a nuisance at all. So no movement restriction, doubled in defence if everybody's attacking across a river to a defender, and so the major rivers, you have +2 or +3 movement points, non-mech and mech. Defender doubled and attacker halved, so even worse. We do actually have bridges, so when these roads go across, the bridges kind of cancel out the movement points. So you can use rail bridges as well, so when the railway goes across the river, it'll only add movement points +1, +2 to the movement across, and that's it for the rivers, really. There's no engineering getting across that kind of thing. The major rivers here, which are the big guys, the thick guys here, let's say +2, +3 to get across, and no tank shifts, of course, as well. In a rain turn, actually, minor rivers do actually cost +1 movement point to get across as well. So that's pretty much it for the terrain types here. These big round red numbers are victory point locations, and the Caucasus campaign is all about getting a number of victory points for the Germans. So they start with none, and as they take these cities and locations, they will get more victory points. And I think is it 16 to get through to win the game? Sorry, that's 12 victory points. The victory points are counted on here. We start on 0. Right, so that's the map, as much of the map as I want to go through. Actually, there's probably quite a lot there for you to go through. But now I'll probably look at the counters. Right, so let's look at some sample counters here. So very much like Holland 44, the counters, we have your traditional 3 values, attack, defence, movement, and your standard NATO symbols here. Now, one thing that is different from Holland 44, Holland 44 had a black box with a white number on the right hand side of the NATO symbol, and that was the number of steps. Now this is done differently here in that this is actually a 3-step unit. When you flip it over, it has a thin band on it, and that shows that it has 2 steps, and then that, when it takes a loss, will be a remnant, and the remnant has a wide band through 1 step only. And if we look, say, at this Russian Guard unit here, we flip that over, you can see the band, the wide band immediately, which means 1 step. So that's a difference in format on the on the counters. Now with this tank division here, what we also have here is we have a red dot. So just swapping those over and looking at a Russian tank unit, that's got a black dot. That's an armour bonus shift, if it's applicable on the terrain, for that unit. There is a red one on here. That is actually an elite armour bonus shift. So there's actually two shifts on the odds column for that when applicable. So this is only on the German side. You'll note, of course, we've got the red box for the defence factor here and here. That denotes elite. Slight change again, I believe, on Holland 42. That gave you some bonus in, I think it was attack. Here, this and its similar white box, which is for green units, this has applicability on determined defence in this version of the system. So there's no combat benefit, but determined defence table, these apply. We have the white surround on some units. This is a free stacking unit, so normally with the Germans it's 3 units plus a free stacking unit, and with the Russians it's 2 units plus a free stacking unit, and this denotes the free stacking unit here. Interestingly enough, of course, this Soviet Guards unit here, it has an implied red box around the defence, so the equivalent of that NKVD unit here. So that is actually elite, even though the rest of the counter is elite, something you can kind of easily miss. And there are also some units with coloured boxes, and this denotes some kind of movement restriction or some kind of regional restriction on that unit. The dark blue, that's usually to do with not being able to move until the enemy is within 5 hexes. That's really the only one that's that relevant in this scenario, to be honest. We have the kind of artillery units as was in Holland 44. These are artillery support units here, offering a shift, and when they fired, they turn over and are used effectively. We also have aircraft here, so with the German Luftwaffe here, so that, again, use of that in an attack is a shift as well. And finally, just referring back to these support units here, so they don't naturally shift back unless they are on a rail line which is fed to a supply source. And there are also things called resource points and supply points as well, and I'll just go through that later and just go through what that means. But essentially these are a supply unit which is in two forms. That's a mobile form, and that's in a supply dump form with no movement. You need to be in this format for it to be useful, and these can be used to flip back these units, and in a turn you can flip from one to the other, and these have a motorized value here, as well as supply units. Last thing I wanted to do is just on this mountain unit here, German mountain unit here, and it's only on the Axis side, German and Romanian units, you get a little suffix here, which is double the attack value here. That is the number you'll use if you're attacking into mountains, because it's a mountain unit. And that's really about it for the units that I want to go through. Then there's a few other nuances which we'll come across, but that pretty much is it. So now we're moving on to the turn sequence, and this is the turn record track and reinforcement display for the Caucasus campaign. And one slight criticism, I suppose, of the system is there isn't one of those lovely detailed sequence of plays, something like on the back of a rule book or on a player aid card or something like that. But we do actually have a sequence of play. It's fairly well hidden actually, but here it's at the bottom of the reinforcement display here. And even though it's very brief and doesn't really talk about a lot, it is actually quite adequate, because the game is fairly straightforward in its structure. So therefore, you can get really whatever you need out of this small sequence of play, which normally in some games you need a lot more. As long as you've got the system down pat, of course, particularly on the combat and movement. So anyway, just running through this sequence of play here, we have a weather phase, which is a dice roll on the chart, depending on what season it is. Won't be doing a lot of that in this scenario. Weather doesn't really come into it until towards the end of the game when we get some mud possibility, and we don't even roll for it in the first few turns. We have an initial phase, and this is for each side, so it's an I go, you go. You go through the sequence of play once for one side and then again for the other side. So initial phase here, you've got some ready reckoners here. So you ready your air units, only on the German side. Place your reinforcements, use replacements, use resource points, and then it says here flip HQs with resource points or supply points. And that's what you do in your initial phase. And then we'll move on the movement phase. So the movement phase, you use your movement factor. You can, in circumstances, use what's known as a tactical move, which is 2 hexes, 1 or 2 hexes. Also, if you move without going into a zone of control of another unit, then you can add 2 movement points to your movement, and that's your movement there. when moving out of a zone of control, you so it's a +2 movement points to move out of a zone of control. However, also there's an optional rule which I think I'll be playing for this scenario, which is known as the disengagement table, which you have to roll a dice to actually disengage. On a 1 or a 2, you can't, you're stuck. On a 3, you disengage but you lose a step, and then 4 to 6, you get away with a couple of modifiers on that. So I think I might be using that, and so the movement with Zocs is quite important here. And one thing, of course, in this system which is well known is the idea of a Zoc bond. So when you, for example, I'll show it here, when you have 2 units with a gap in the middle, either a hex side or a hex, then that is effectively out of bounds to the opposition. You can't move into it, or you can't move across that hex side. It's a bond between the units. Yeah, so that's the movement phase. Combat phase. So combat phase initially very straightforward. Well, we have the combat results table here, and just as you can see, it's standard odds column 1 to 3 to 7 to 1, dice roll 1 to 6, no die roll modifiers, just column modifiers here. Results, your standard sort of attacker loss, defender loss. Defender loss tends to also have a retreat and advance included. We have exchanges and defender retreat exchanges as well, so special exchange. Interesting about exchanges is the opponent chooses the step loss to lose, and with a lot of the attacker benefit results, you have an advance, an ADV advance, which is a maximum number of hexes that can be advanced. Can advance up to 4, but it depends on the unit, how far it can advance as well. So mechanized units can of course go 4, cavalry 3, everybody else 2. Something on here as well which is different from Holland 44 is to do with the determined defence. When you have if you look at the colour coding here, and the orange and red areas restrict the determined defence table, there are other restrictions as well. So the determined defence and desperation defence are when you actually want to stay in the hex and not suffer the retreat as the defender. You can roll on the determined defence table, which we'll look at, and see whether you can do that. When you're in the orange and red zones you can't do that, have no option, and only in very special case in the orange, when you've got a negative modifier and it's a victory point hex and you're on desperate defence, and desperate defence is when you are trying not to retreat, because if you did retreat you'd take step losses through retreating through Zocs, etc. So yeah, that's the combat results table, and looks very straightforward, but the advance and the retreat aspect is a lot more complex than the actual combat results table themselves. There are shifts here. Been through a few before, so tank shifts and elite tank shifts here, air support, artillery support. There is a Soviet massive barrage which we won't use in this game, in this replay. Disrupted defender, and then for the defender again, air support, tank shift, elite armor, and a fortification where you can build fortifications on lesser terrain, clear terrain, and I think woods as well. You can build these fortifications and get a column shift in the defender's favour. So each unit, they are able to trace back to a supply source. There's two portions on the supply line. One is known as the overland path, which is 5 hexes long, but mountain and marsh count as 2 hexes for that, which is from the unit itself to a road. So a road needs to be within 5 hexes of the unit. Then if you can trace all the way back down that road to a supply source, you are in supply. So you can be out of supply, and without a supply, it reduces your attack strength. You can only use tactical movement with mechanised units. You can't advance more than 2 hexes on advance, and you can't receive replacements. So actually, that's not so bad, particularly for a defending side. Your defence strength is still the same. However, you can suffer a further thing, which is a further state called isolation. So isolation means that you're effectively surrounded by zonal controls and units. You cannot possibly anyway get to a supply source by any route, never mind overland or anything like that. With that, you then also have the issue of isolation attrition. So you make a dice roll to see if the unit loses a step every turn. And of course there are some modifiers, particularly for cities. And yeah, that's supply for you. So check at the end of your own turn. So you check supply to check for the isolation attrition, and then you can flip HQs with supply points. So HQs and support units as well. So this is where we can flip back used artillery support units, and that's the turn. So we then go back, of course, to the other player's turn, the other side's turn, and run through it again. And then it's our sequence of play. So as you can see, that's not actually that bad a representation of the sequence of play, but it's always nice to have that big long page-long detailed explanation. But this kind of works for it as well. Right, so I think that's pretty much all I want to explain about the system. As I say, go back to my Holland 44 videos to get some other details and a slightly nuanced take on the system as well. But for now, we'll kind of crack on with our playthrough, and hopefully you can join me for that. So for the moment, bye for now.